Hello and welcome back to A Simple Low Carb Life. We are now starting Module 6, Video 1, and the theme of this particular module, the first video, is the Low Carb Pantry Overhaul. And this one is kind of fun because you're going to be ridding your home of things that are high carb and learning how to add new things into your home so that you can just have everything you need on your shelf or at least have an ongoing grocery list so that you can have supplies on hand and not tank your diet by only having high carbohydrate items in your home. So the low carb pantry is extremely important, and it is really important, more particularly, to have quite a variety of low carb ingredients in your home so you can cook or bake delicious low carb foods, just like you do with products that you have in your home that are high carb. In very short order, you will become very skilled at whipping together low carb products that you can eat that taste great, so you can have variety and not just be bored out of your mind with the same kind of bland foods. This is not what we're trying to get you into. No one can stay on that kind of a regime. It becomes tedious and horrible, and nobody can do it. We wouldn't expect you to. So the key to this is having a lot of variety and learning how to make some simple dishes that you can rotate through, and then experimenting more and learning more and more about how to make delicious foods, just like you do when you're learning how to cook high carb items. Very similar. It's also just as important to rid your home of unhealthy, high carb, highly processed foods that you'll be tempted to eat or that your family will want to continue to eat. Now, weaning your family off is sometimes harder than weaning yourself off, but there are some strategies for that as well, or at least some compromises that can be made. But really, limiting your access, that when it's late in the evening and you're tired and you start fantasizing about chips, if you don't have them in your home, unless you get in your car and drive somewhere, you're not going to have any. So it's really good not to have them available. So what should I have available in my low carb pantry, you might be thinking? Well, the key to success in the low carb kitchen is knowing how to substitute low carb ingredients for common high ones. And we're going to tell you about how to do that. So once you understand the basics of how these substitute ingredients work, you can alter just about any recipe that's a traditional recipe to make it low carb. And sometimes you have to experiment a little bit, and some recipes are not as easy as others to tweak. But ultimately, once you become skilled at this, it's really not that hard. Hey, if I can do it, anybody can, truly. I was no cook or chef in my previous life, and now I can defend myself pretty well in the low carb way of eating. So let's begin, first off, to build your low carb pantry by getting rid of high carb items that you need to avoid. This has a twofold purpose. One is you're making room for your low carb products. But number two, if you don't have items in your home, you're motivated to go out and buy low carb ones because you don't have high carb ones around anymore. So your pantry's kind of bare. So it gives you incentive, really, to go and get these items. Now, what can you do with the high carb ingredients in your home that you're getting rid of? You know, most of us were raised by parents that lived through the Depression era, at least I did. And I had to hear about how poor they were when I was a child and how my parents were taught not to waste anything. And so a lot of us have been affected by that, whether you grew up in the United States or elsewhere. We just hate to waste things. That seems to be part of our culture. So what do you do with these things that you're going to be throwing out? Seems like a waste. Well, if they're already opened, you really can't give them to anybody unless they're a friend of yours. So you could donate them to interested friends or family members that still are eating high carb. If they're unopened items, you could donate them to your local food bank that would be absolutely thrilled to get this food, and or a homeless shelter. Really, if you think about it, eating even one day's worth of high carb foods will delay your plan for good health and might even discourage you from starting the diet at all because it will keep your cravings going and your lust for high carb foods. So those very few dollars worth of high carb groceries are really not worth the cost to your overall health. They really aren't. Now, you might be asking yourself, why can't I keep them in my home? Well, I guess the answer to that is it really depends. Number one, if you have family members in your home that are not really on board with eating low carb with you yet, you may need to occasionally cook separate higher carb meals or higher carb items for the meal or foods for them. So you may need to keep some around to satisfy your family who's not really on board with your way of eating. Also, if everyone in the home is willing to eat low carb, and that often is more the case with a partner rather than children, but basically, if you can get your younger children on board, it's a little easier to do that. But if you can get family members on board to eat like you're eating, then get those high carb ingredients out of your house, no matter how you do it. Just get them out. It's best to just throw them out if you have no other way of getting rid of them. It's really better to make a special trip to the grocery store to buy occasional high carb ingredients to placate your family or any friends that might be coming over that eat high carb than to keep them on hand. It really is. It's just not worth having them available because people get tired and weak, and you start thinking about things that you used to eat, and off to the kitchen you go, and before you know it, that bag of chips is gone. So it's really not worth it. Get it out of your house. So, what are exactly the high carb ingredients that I need to get rid of? Now, it seems kind of silly that we have to enumerate these, but a lot of things really it's not intuitive that they're really high in carbs because we've been told for years that these things are good for us, and they're not. They're really high in carbohydrates, uh, create obesity, high cholesterol, and a whole host of other health problems. So let's just quickly whip through these. And you can also read these on the screen, but I'm just going to quickly run through them. So it would be any kind of flour that's made of wheat, white, whole wheat, uh, anything with gluten in it, really. So spelt, kamut, rye, all of those types of flours are really high in carbohydrates. Get rid of them. Cornmeal, cornstarch, any form of high carb pasta, which is pretty much just about any pasta, unless it's shirataki noodles, which we've talked about. Oatmeal, cream of wheat, cream of rice, any commercial dry cereals, any granolas, quinoa, potatoes of any kind. That includes white, sweet potatoes, yams, or all the specialty potatoes. Yuca, wheat bread, bagels, tortillas, pita breads or flatbreads, crackers for that matter, wheat germ, oat bran, noodles, except for shirataki noodles that we've discussed, any kind of white rice, whether it's white, brown, wild, or any other type, risotto, couscous, tapioca, chips, pretzels, rice cakes, Cheetos, pretty much anything from the central part of any grocery store, all those chippy, snacky things, crackers, beets, which are high in carbohydrates. They have a lot of good properties, but they're very high in carbohydrates. And so if you're on a ketogenic diet and trying to keep your carbs under 30 grams, it's going to be hard to do that if you eat beets. So you need to get rid of those during weight loss, particularly. Peas, breading or breadcrumbs that are made of gluten containing flours, which are most commercial breadings. I mean, you usually can't find any that are low carb. You usually just have to make them. Cow's milk of any percent or goat's milk, they both have a fair amount of carbs. For example, cow's milk, whole milk, has 11 grams of net carbohydrates per cup. Non-fat has 14 grams. So it's really not worth having milk on board in your household when there are milk substitutes that we've talked about. Now, if you have half and half or whipping cream or extra whipping cream, those are certainly okay to have in the house because they're very concentrated, they're very, very low in carbs, and they're high in fat. You don't need to use much of it, and great to put in your coffee or basically as an additive to soups to make them creamy. Just don't use cow's milk or goat's milk. They're very high in carbohydrates. They contain lactose, which is just another kind of sugar. As a matter of fact, you want to get sugar out of your house in any form, brown, white, confectioners, any form of sugar. Any form of honey needs to go. Agave needs to go. Corn syrup, which you don't have on the screen, but that is higher than anything that we've listed in carbohydrates. Get that out of your house. Dates, date sugars, coconut sugars, all really high in carbs. Beans and legumes, you want to get out of your house when you're in the weight loss phase There are a few beans that are okay to have in your house. Black soybeans make a great replacement for black beans. Lentils are probably the lowest in net carbohydrates per serving. So while you're in the weight loss phase, probably a good idea not to have them very often. So that's a maybe to get out of your house. I certainly wouldn't have a big bowl of them like you may have in the past because that's way too many carbs. Your relationship with beans and legumes now needs to be more think garnish amount. And any breaded meats, if you've got chicken fried steak in your freezer or chicken nuggets or fish sticks or batter, anything, you need to get rid of that because that batter not only contains a high amount of carbs, but it has so much fat in it that's usually not healthy fat. It's usually vegetable oil fats that's just not good for you at all. You won't lose weight if you're eating those for a whole number of reasons. Now, this is not an all inclusive list, but these are the main items that people have in their household commonly that are really high in carbs, and some of them you might not think are unhealthy. So you can pause this, look back at this, get a screenshot, however you want to do that, to get rid of these items in your home so that you can make room for the low carb items. So, exactly what are low carb items that I can have in my home? What can I have? All right, in terms of meats, there's a number of meats that you can have in your home that are healthy for you and very low in carbs. Most meats, if they're not slathered in sauces and breading, have 0 to 1 carbs per serving. So, what kind of meats could you use? Bacon, turkey bacon, sausage, turkey sausage, beef, chicken, ham, jerky that's made without teriyaki or sugary marinade, which is a little harder to find. But if you read labels, you can sometimes find jerkies that are just simply dried meat with salt on them. Pastrami, salami, pepperoni, whether it's pork or turkey, lamb, goat, venison, ostrich, buffalo, rabbit, a whole bunch of other meats. What about seafood? Yes, you can have seafood. Shrimp, crab, salmon, sardines, herring, scallops, tuna, other fresh or marine fish, or shellfish. Basically, no breading on them and not in teriyaki or sugary marinades. Then they're really incredibly low in carbs or have none. Well, what about dairy? Butter is fine. Eggs is often thrown in the dairy category, so they're thrown in here in this case. Half and half, whipping cream, heavy cream, unsweetened, plain Greek yogurt, Dannon Light, and Fit, which is basically a specific type of Greek yogurt by Dannon that's really low in carbohydrates. Read the labels carefully, however, because if you pick up the wrong Dannon product, it's going to have 20 or 30 net carbs in it, so be careful. Kroger brand, which also makes, I believe, another grocery chain is Fred Meyer and some others that will carry this brand, have a particular type of yogurt called Carb Master. It has 4 net carbs per container and comes in a variety of flavors. I was nearly heartbroken when I moved away from Washington to California and could no longer find this. So if you find that it's really good, just read the label carefully to make sure that it is indeed low carb. Also, sour cream you can have in your home. What about milk alternatives? Okay, you've just been told you can't have milk. Well, what can you use? Well, a number of things actually that taste better than milk. And I never thought I would say that, but they do. They taste great. Unsweetened almond milk, unsweetened hemp milk, unsweetened coconut milk. Now, these are all in the dairy section or in containers, not in the cans. So, unsweetened coconut milk in the can is very concentrated, so it has more carbs and is often sweetened. Unsweetened soy milk, and Blue Diamond brand in particular makes an unsweetened vanilla almond milk, which is the only flavored unsweetened almond milk that I'm aware of that has the same amount of carbs as plain, which is 1 to 2 carbs per cup. So, those are some great alternatives to use. How about cheeses? Well, quite a number of cheeses are fine. Most of them are actually. The creamier cheeses, you have to really read the labels. Excuse me. But generally speaking, most cheeses are very low carbs, usually less than 1, per ounce. So cheddar, chèvre, which is goat. Goat cheese, cottage cheese, whole or 2%. Don't get non-fat because remember, the lower the fat, the higher the carbs. Remember that. Cream cheese, Neuchâtel cheese, Farmers, feta, Gouda, pepper jack, mozzarella, Parmesan, ricotta, mascarpone, blue cheese, gorgonzola, and many, many others. Just read the labels and make sure that there's not some sneaky carbs in them or fruit that can really increase the amount. Some cheeses will have figs and apricots and other things mixed with them, so you have to really read the labels. Now, what about veggies and fruit? Now, problem with fruit, most people overeat fruit because we've been told to. And frankly, it's very, very sweet, much sweeter than sugar, and it can become quite addicting. I was a fruitaholic myself. I hardly ate a vegetable in my previous high carb life. I would eat unlimited tons and tons of fruit, whole cartons of uh, strawberries and berries, and I'm not talking the pints, I'm talking quarts, and baskets of apples and mangoes and all sorts of high carb fruits. And I would be constantly hungry and irritable from these moods going all over the place from my blood sugar going up and down and up and down. So, very, very few fruits are permitted in the weight loss phase. And once you reach maintenance, you always need to be careful about having fruits in your life. You need to think of them in terms of amount as a little tiny garnish amount at any one sitting, and then your blood sugar won't go up, and it's usually not enough to trigger you to want more and more and more. But I would honestly encourage you in the weight loss phase, or at least for the first few months of your weight loss, don't have any fruits so that you get this intense desire for sweets out of your system. And then when you reintroduce them in very small amounts, they will seem so incredibly sweet that it will almost seem foreign to you. Trust me on this. I never thought that would be the case because I honestly was a fruitaholic, but um, really, with a little time and detoxing yourself, if you will, from all of the high carbs and the super, super sweet concentrates, you won't have the desire for them like you do now. So, what are some veggies that you can have? Uh, Artichokes, asparagus, avocado, berries you see in bold here, Marion, blueberry, strawberry, raspberry, blackberry. If they're in bold, that means they're a little higher in carbs, so beware. Lemon or lime wedges, bok choy, broccoli, cucumbers, cabbage, cauliflower, chard of any kind. Swiss chard is a really great green. Chipotle peppers, pastillo peppers, serranos, jalapenos, Anaheim, bell peppers, eggplant, green beans. Just beware they're a little higher in carbs. Be sure and count any of these carbs. Look them up if there's not a label on them when you buy them. And if you buy them fresh, there won't be. So please look up how many carbs per serving so you know what kind of a serving to make. Hearts of palm, kale, lettuce of any kind, celery, mushrooms, okra, onion, shallot, dill pickles, radishes, whether daikon or conventional. Rutabaga makes a great replacement for potatoes. I'm so thankful for rutabagas. I grew up with potatoes, and this has been a lifesaver for me because when I get the desire for potatoes, I simply use rutabaga. Now, rutabaga is a harder root than a potato, so you always need to cook it longer, but usually what I will do is cook it about 3 minutes in the microwave, and then it will become soft enough that it will act like a potato. So try rutabaga if you're a potato person. You can fix it any way you would make a potato. Chayote squash makes a great substitute for apples, especially if baked. So if you like baked apples or you want to make low carb pies or tarts, this is a fantastic squash to use because it looks, tastes exactly like apples, and I'm not kidding. It's really great. Jicama is another apple substitute, or it's another vegetable that even if you cook it remains crunchy. So if you want something crunchy to dip things, to dip into a dip instead of a chip, jicama is great for that. Radishes are great for that. Cucumbers, really, and celery. They stay very, very crunchy. Make a nice chip substitute. You can spice them however you want and use them just like you would a chip. Spaghetti squash, zucchini squash, yellow squash, kabocha squash. And kabocha squash is it's a Japanese squash that's come into the market recently. It's been around in Japan for a number of years, hundreds of years, but really has made an introduction into American life in the last few. It really tastes a lot like a cross between pumpkin and butternut squash to me without the carbs. Both of those have a lot of carbs, butternut squash in particular. So it has, according to MyFitnessPal, 6 net carbs per cup of squash, which is really low for squash. So if you can find that squash, get it and use it. It's delicious. Turnips make another good replacement for potatoes. You can bake them, make fries. Sauerkraut, you can basically adding vinegar to cabbage, you make sauerkraut. Spinach, sprouts, tomatoes, which are technically a fruit, so they're a little bit higher in carbs, but just beware of the amount, among many, many others. Now, you see that absent from that list is watermelon, mango, and a bunch of other very high carb fruits. So the only fruits that you could even consider having during weight loss should be very, very small amount, garnish amounts of berries at a time and only once in a while. How about nuts and seeds? Well, as you've seen in the guidebook and in previous videos, not very recommended during the weight loss phase, at least not the first month or two, for the same reason as fruits in terms of being a trigger food. Now, they're not sweet unless you get ones with sugar on them, which you don't want to do because they're very high in carbs. But nuts and seeds have usually very fat containing and can cause cravings for salty, fatty foods. Now, you're not having chips and crackers and dips and all that now in this way of eating. So often the desire for that just simply gets grafted onto nuts. And nuts are incredibly high in calories because they're high in fat. So if you eat a big old bag of nuts, you are not going to lose weight because you've just eaten 1,000 calories. And so you still have to have some sort of deficit, even if you're eating low carb. And, essentially, if you're eating a lot of nuts, even though they're low carb per serving, you're adding carbs too. So you will bust the bank not only on caloric amount, but on too many carbs. So nuts that you could have, just basically limit that to less than 1/4 a cup per day during weight loss. But again, if you can wait until you're 1 to 2 months into this, you'll be much better off unless you're a very disciplined person. Uh, Nut butters you could use in cooking or even in snacks if you can discipline yourself. Could be almond, cashew, hazelnut, peanut, sunflower. Almonds, hazelnuts, peanuts, soy nuts, and edamame are 2 very low carb nuts. So those are really acceptable to have during weight loss. Honestly, I've never seen any patient or client ever overeat soy nuts or dry roasted edamame. I have seen patients overeat hot edamame that are salted, but dry roasted ones, they're drier. They don't contain as much fat, so you get you get this crunch desire met rather quickly when you chew up a few of them, and then really they don't trigger that desire for more. So they're a good nut if you want something crunchy. Soy nuts or edamame are great. Very low in carbs and high in protein as well. Pecans, walnuts, macadamia nuts. Macadamia nuts are very high in fat and high in calories, so a few of them, if you overeat them, can tank your weight loss. However, they're very low in carbs, so the little goes a long way. So if you're going to grab a nut, that's probably one of the better ones to have on hand. Flax seeds, chia seeds are extremely low in carbs. Usually, the net result is 0 to 1 net carbs. Sesame seeds, also very low in carbs, and most people don't sit and eat a bunch of them. If you just use them as a garnish, that's perfectly fine. Hemp seeds, flaxseed meal, and a number of other seeds and nuts that you can use. But again, this bears repeating. Remember, although nuts contain healthy fats, they are notorious for being a trigger food for many, many people who cannot simply limit them to 1/4 of a cup a day. If that is you and you cannot stop eating nuts, then just stop eating them during weight loss altogether. because you will not lose weight. How about condiments? What condiments can you have that are low carb? There's a number of things. Bouillon of any flavor, capers, white vinegar, cider vinegar, unseasoned rice vinegar. Beware of seasoned vinegars because seasoned usually means sugar added as well as other things. Horseradish, hot sauce, Tabasco, unsweetened lime or lemon juice, mayonnaise, or you can make it yourself, olives, pesto sauce, some salsas, read the labels, soy sauce, Worcestershire sauce, Bragg's amino acids, and Walden Farms is a company that makes salad dressings and sauces that are zero carb, zero calories, zero fat, and come in many, many different flavors. You can go to our online store to find these if you can't find them locally, which is usually hard to do. So, and other salad dressings, but beware of salad dressings because most of them are made with polyunsaturated vegetable oils that really are not good for us in the large amounts that we eat them. All right, we have just gone through Module 6, Video 1, and learned a bit about how to stock your low carb pantry. In the next video, we're going to learn a little bit more about the low carb pantry. So take a break in between, and we'll see you in the next video.